So today I'm going to show you guys how to change differential oil, transfer case fluid, transmission fluid, and the transmission filter on a 2015 to 2022 Chevy Colorado. Now the specific truck that I'm dealing with in this particular video is a 2017 Colorado. It's got about 45,000 miles on it and it has the 2.8 liter Duramax diesel in it. So if you guys have the 3.6 with the 6 or the 8 speed, things may be a little bit different, but overall, you know, the differential, the transfer case and that sort of stuff, it's all going to be identical between all the engines. The only thing that may be different is the transmission service, depending on what transmission you have and what engine you're dealing with. I personally like to follow the severe maintenance schedule, because in my mind it's a lot easier to change fluids than it is to change transmissions. So I'd rather change my fluids a little bit more often than really what's required, in an effort to try and preserve the transmissions and the axles and stuff like that. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Again, my truck only has about 45,000 miles on it, so it's probably a little bit early to be doing this sort of thing, but I'd rather err on the side of caution. So starting out over here on the left, this is the gear oil that I'm going to be using. This is Lucas Full Synthetic 75-140. I bought a gallon of it to do the front axle and the rear axle. I used just under a gallon, probably about 3 quarts, but there's no sight glass on this gallon jug that I could tell you guys exactly how much I used. I do have some left, as you guys hopefully can hear there, but yeah. GM recommends a 75-90. I'm just stepping up to a 75-140, a little bit thicker fluid, a little bit better protection. I may take a hit on my fuel mileage, a very minute amount. It's probably going to be imperceptible to me, but to me, I'd rather have the additional film strength and less wear that goes along with that. So that's why I stepped up to a 75-140. If you want to run 75-90, go ahead. I don't think you're probably not going to have any issues unless you're doing any sort of like heavy towing. As far as the transfer case, this is what I use in the transfer case. So this is GM, AC Delco Dexron 6. This is the full synthetic version of Dexron 6. GM sells 2 different versions of Dexron 6. So you can buy AC Delco Dexron 6 in full synthetic or non-synthetic. It just depends on what price point you want to pay for. You can also use this in the transmission as well. That's going to be entirely up to you. I strayed off GM's recommendation on transmission fluid. We'll get to this in a second, but if you want to use the Mobil 1 synthetic LV ATF, you can use that in the transfer case. The thing is, this is a heck of a lot cheaper. So that's kind of why I did what I did. I used 2 of the 4 quarts, so I've got enough for another change. This, I have about a quart left, so I can use it on another small project. As far as the transmission fluid, this is where I kind of strayed from GM's recommendation. So this is Mobil 1's full synthetic LV ATF. This is the blue label ATF that GM recommends for the 8-speed transmissions to get rid of the shuddering problems with those torque converters. I put this stuff in the transmission and I used probably about 7 quarts with the filter change. And one thing I can tell you guys with the 6 speeds, if you put this stuff in there, it will shift smoother. It doesn't shift quicker, it doesn't shift firmer. It basically makes the shifts as you accelerate imperceptible from the driver's seat. The only thing that you notice is the change in RPM of the engine. From the seat of your pants, and if you had your eyes closed and not listening, the shifts would be imperceptible. It really cleaned up the shifts on this transmission. And I don't have any long-term results as far as how well this stuff's going to work in this 6-speed, but initially, as soon as I put this stuff in the pan, went for a ride around the block to heat it up to check the fluid level, instantaneously, as soon as I left my driveway and I started running through the gears, immediately I noticed a change in shift quality for the better. So in addition to changing the transmission fluid, I'm also changing the transmission filter. This one is for the 6-speed. You guys with the 8 speeds, it requires a different filter. The procedure's pretty similar, but because I have a diesel with the 6-speed, that's mostly what I'm going to be detailing in the video. I'll kind of add in details as needed on the 8-speed and the V6 trucks, but overall, changing these fluids, super easy. A little time consuming just because it's both axles, the transfer case, and the transmission. Takes a little bit of time. If you guys are looking for any other sort of maintenance that I've done in this truck, I really haven't done a whole heck of a lot. You know, I shot, I think the only other maintenance video that I've done in this truck is I changed the fuel filters on my diesel, and I also shot a video on basically how to change the oil in it. Short of that, this is really the only other maintenance that I've done to the truck. So with that, let's get the truck up in the air, and we're gonna start with the axles. All right, so we're gonna start with the rear axle. I got the truck up in the air, as you can see. So before we even get started, I'm gonna address this right off the bat because there's always somebody in one of these like repair videos that I do that looks at the back of this thing or the bottom of one of my vehicles and says, wow, that thing has a massive leak. It's undercoating, it's perfectly fine, it's keeping it from rusting. You want more information? I'll put a card up in the corner. With that said, as far as these Colorados go, GM actually changed a couple things on these rear axles throughout the production run from I think 2015 to 2022. What they really changed is the drain. So this truck has a drain bolt on the bottom of it that I can just pull the bolt out, drain all the fluid right out the bottom, and I don't have to pull the cover. Some of the later production, I want to say like after probably 2018 or so, they got rid of the drain bolt in the bottom of the axle, so you have to pull the cover. To pull the cover, remove all the bolts, leave the top one in, get a screwdriver, just pull it back, let it drain out, and then finally take that top bolt out and, you know, do it that way. Because I have a drain bolt, you know, it's going to be a little bit easier for me to do. That fluid actually looks really good still. So I bought this truck new, as some of you are probably well aware. I've had it, well, I want to say what, 4 years now. So it's got just over 40,000 miles on it. Here you can see there's a little bit of buildup on the magnet, but it's not bad. That's pretty normal. So anyway, this is, you know, kind of like the first major service that I've ever really done to the truck. And GM says like you can get away like 50, 60,000 without doing this stuff, but the severe interval on all this stuff is around 40. So like I said at the beginning, I try to adhere to the 40, or the more severe, I should say, just because fluid's cheap, axles are expensive. So I'm gonna let this sit here and drip drain. I'm gonna get my plugs cleaned up, get some fresh Teflon tape put on them, and then we'll get this thing filled back up. I got my drain plug all Teflon taped up. Get that started, and then we're just going to fill up the differentials until it starts coming out the fill hole. So not really a whole lot to the drain and fill on one of these, at least if you have the drain plug like I do. So you guys with the newer trucks, sorry, you're going to have to pull the cover. No way around it. So to fill this thing, I've just got a pump in this gallon jug. I'll have a link in the description to the pump. They work really well with quart bottles. Doesn't really work as well with the gallon, but you got to use what you got, right? So here I'm getting close there. It's starting to pour out. So you can let that sort of self-level, let it, you know, pour out the fill hole or whatever you want to do. If it's a little over full, it's not going to be the end of the world. So I'm just going to shove the plug back in it. So there you go. I'll hose that down with some brake cleaner real quick, get that all cleaned off, and we'll go up and do the front diff. Now, because I have a ZR2, to get to the front diff, I got to pull the skid plate. So 15mm bolts. And now that that's off, it's pretty much a mirror image of the rear. So there's a drain bolt here, fill bolt up here. I don't know if this changed on the later model trucks. The later model trucks may or may not have this drain bolt. Again, I'm not sure. In which case, you have to pull the cover. There's no way around that. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this stuff drained. So that fluid really didn't look too bad in there, guys. One thing I have seen with some of these differentials is there's definitely some more buildup on this thing. I've never changed the fluid in the front. I've changed it once in the rear already. So there's no big chunks to anything, but as long as you don't have any big chunks, you're gonna have some buildup come off of that, you know, magnet, obviously. So the fluid, actually, I'm kind of shocked how good the fluid looked in the front, just because I've seen some of these guys where these front differentials absorb a lot of heat from the engine while the, you know, truck's going down the road, and it gets hot and cold cycled a lot. And what ends up happening is you end up building up condensation inside the front differential because it's changing temperature so much with every drive cycle. You're never getting the front diff hot enough to actually boil off that water that's being built up inside the diff. So I've pulled the front cover on F-150 differentials on the front end, and it comes out like somebody drove the thing through water. Like, it comes out so milky, it's crazy. Like, that's why I'm doing this a little bit early, just because I didn't know the condition of the fluid in here, and if it was full of condensation, I didn't want that condensation just sitting in there. So the procedure on the front differential is pretty much an exact mirror image of the rear. Pull the two plugs out, drain the fluid. While the fluid's draining, clean off the magnets, put some fresh Teflon tape on the plugs, and fill it back up with fluid. There's really not a whole lot to the drain and fill on a differential. All right, so I got it to the point that, you know, it's leaking out the fill hole. So go ahead and we'll put the plug back in. All right, so to do the transfer case, we're going to pull this little skid plate off. 15mm bolts again, there's 3 of them. Zip those out. Pull the plate down, get it out of the way, and that'll give us access to the drain. Now when you go to drain the transfer case, pull the fill bolt first, because there's a seal that exists between the transfer case and the transmission, and if that seal's bad, it'll overfill the transfer case with fluid. So basically, if you get a ton of fluid coming out of here, there's a bad seal between the transfer case and the transmission. I obviously don't have any problems, so I can go ahead and pull the drain bolt. It's kind of surprising, neither one of these fill plugs or drain plugs, neither one of these have magnets on them. So nothing really to clean, you know, just drain the fluid, put fresh fluid in it, and that's really about it. Put the drain back in, and then we can go ahead and start filling this thing up with the fluid. So I'm also going to use the this pump to try and, you know, fill the transfer case. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this thing in the transmission fluid that I'm going to fill this with, and sort of purge out all the gear oil before I just start dumping a bunch of gear oil into my transfer case. We'll get this thing up into the fill, and we'll start filling this transfer case up. This thing, I think, only takes a couple quarts. Shouldn't really take a whole heck of a lot. Definitely fills easier because the fluid's a lot thinner. I can pump it faster. So there it's full. We're going to let that sort of self-level, let the excess drain out into the pan. All right, so that's slowed down to a slow drip. Put the plug back in. I used right at about 2 quarts on this thing. It wasn't really a whole lot of fluid in the transfer case, so. Hit that with some brake clean. Clean off the old the transmission fluid that was dripping all over it. And we can go ahead and get our skid plate. We'll mount the skid plate back on. So probably the most involved thing that we're going to talk about in this video is going to be the transmission service. So we're going to basically drop the pan, clean everything out from inside the pan, install a new filter, fill it up with fluid, and then you should be good to go. But as you guys can see, I've got a ton of undercoating buildup on this pan. So I'm going to clean this pan off before I pull the pan, because I don't want any of this crud ending up inside the transmission. So I'm gonna spend a couple minutes here just cleaning this stuff off so I don't end up contaminating something with undercoating. Now, if you have a V6 truck, you're gonna be faced with something similar to this. So over here on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see part of the Y pipe actually runs underneath the transmission pan. And because that exhaust pipe is so close to the transmission pan, you can't drop the pan far enough to get the filter out. So what you have to do on a V6 truck is there's a 3-bolt flange on each side. You need to remove all 3 bolts from both sides, drop the Y pipe down, and that will give you enough clearance that you can then take the pan off. It does not matter if you have the 6-speed or the 8-speed. If you have a V6 truck and you're trying to do the transmission service, you need to not completely remove the Y pipe, but at least drop it down far enough that you can get the pan out. I don't have to worry about that because I have a diesel. All right, so as you can see, got the pan, got the upper flange of the transmission cleaner, if you will. First thing I'm gonna do is remove this bolt for the level. And we're gonna drain, as much as we can into the pan. Hopefully something comes out of here. My gasket's stuck. The gasket for my bolt, there, stuck to the pan. Now this bolt that I removed is the bolt to check the level on this 6-speed. The 8-speed is going to be up near the driver's side front corner of the pan. The bolt is pretty much going to be identical to this one. It's just in a different location. It functions the exact same way. So this truck's not anywhere near like ride height. The frame itself is level on the lift right now, and normally this thing has a bit of a front rake to it, so there's a little bit more oil or fluid in the back of the pan than what there normally would be. So the other nice thing that this is doing, it's a nice controlled way to drain it. Obviously when we go to pull this pan, I want as much as I can out of the pan as possible, so it makes the least amount of mess possible. The other thing I have here, guys, you guys may want to look into it, is I've got a large sort of extension for my drain pan that it works really well for transmissions like this because it's so much larger than a standard drain pan. I'll put a link to it in the description. It works with the upright tall oil drains like I have for this lift, and it works the same, with a regular drain pan. So keep that in mind if you're looking for, a way to not make a giant mess of your garage floor or driveway. So while that's doing its thing, I'm gonna start pulling some of these bolts. They're just 10mm bolts on the bottom of the pan. So I'm gonna start zipping these loose, and then we're gonna start gingerly lowering the back edge of the pan, probably the back edge, to try and drain as much as we can, out the back of the pan and into the drain pan. So what I have is I have the front loose, and I'm loosening the rear of the pan more than the front. So I'm trying to get as much of this oil out the back of the pan as what I can. All these fasteners that are in the pan, they're all the same, so where they go back really doesn't matter. And there we go. I also coated my impact in transmission fluid. Perfect. So basically to control the mess, you really have to basically lower the pan as slowly as possible on one side. That's the easiest way to try and eliminate as much mess as you can. I've seen people online also like suck the fluid out of the fill, and to me, yeah, you can, but either way you're going to end up pulling the pan. So it just seems like another step to me. If you were just exchanging fluid, you know, sucking the old fluid out, putting new fluid in, sure, I guess you could do that. But if you're going in there to change the filter, clean out the magnet, clean out the pan, it just seems like an extra step to go through the rigmarole of, you know, sucking out the fluid to drop the pan. There's always one fastener I miss. So there you go. That's the inside of my pan after I think like 43,000 miles. Really not a whole lot in there. It's actually fairly clean. I'm kind of shocked. I thought it was going to be worse than what it was. Now at this point we've got basically a bunch of cleaning to do. I'm going to let this sit here and drip, but we got to take this pan, clean out the bottom of the pan, get, you know, the magnet all cleaned up, get the inside of the pan clean. You pull your gasket off of here. The gasket's reusable. We'll wipe the gasket down, clean up the mounting flange, just wipe the mounting flange down with a rag, make sure everything's nice and clean, so when we put that pan back on there that everything is nice and clean and as it should be. All right, so over at the bench, I've got the pan here, and you're just gonna wipe down the mounting flange and get all the crud off of here. If you have any metal buildup inside the pan, like you can look and see, you can see that pan's a little bit cleaner there. So what you're gonna do, get some brake cleaner, get some old rags and stuff, and you're also gonna clean off the magnet. So if you look here, this is all metal shavings that are just naturally occur in the transmission as it wears. There's nothing you're gonna do to prevent those magnets from just naturally occurring inside a transmission. That's why they put the magnet in there. As far as how much metal should be on this thing, it should be a fine powder. If you have any large chunks of anything, you have transmission problems. Take it to somebody. Changing the fluid is not gonna fix it. So once your pan's clean, you can set the gasket back on the pan, and there's little tabs on the gasket that sort of lock it into the pan. So when you're trying to put everything back together, just attach it to the pan and it, you know, won't go anywhere. All right, so the filter, really just is supposed to pop out of here. There's nothing really holding the filter in. Now there's a rubber seal that's going to go up in this hole that comes with the new filter. I'm not going to bother changing this one because it's still soft. It still is going to seal well. And from my experience, they're kind of a pain to get out of there. And to me, it's just not always worth it. Like I said, this one still feels like it's in really, really good shape. So I'm just going to jam a new filter in there, throw the pan back on, start dumping fluid back in it, and we'll set the level. Take a little bit of old transmission fluid, just put it on the filter around where it's going to seat on that that rubber seal up in the transmission, and then just push it up into place basically. There you go, installed. So now we can throw the pan back on. So these pan bolts, they only get torqued to 80 inch-pounds, not foot-pounds. So there's not much torque on these. I'm just using the impact to run these up in here because it's gonna take me a week to do it otherwise. And then I'm gonna run through, torque everything just to make sure everything's nice and even. I'm just trying to do this relatively evenly. I know that there's probably a pretty elaborate torque sequence for this, but so this is over on the passenger side of the transmission. Right up by this wiring harness for the def injector is the actual fill port. And let me pull this thing out of here and kind of show you how this works. So it's just a rubber plug in the center of it. What you're gonna do is you're gonna pull up on the center of it, and that's gonna sort of release it. And then you're gonna just kind of pry this thing up and out of here. It's kind of a pain, I'm sure, you know, especially probably laying on your back, it's probably even worse. But the nice thing is the exhaust is nice and cool right now. So I know you don't really have to worry about burning yourself on anything, but there. So it's just a matter of getting in there, prying this thing up and out. So you pull this little plastic plug off the top, pop that out, and then you just, you know, pop the rest of it out. And it's just a plug. So at this point, now we can start filling that fill port, you know, with fluid. So what I'm gonna do is I've got 6 quarts of fluid for this thing. I'm gonna put this, I don't know what you wanna call this. It's not really a drain bolt, but this bolt for checking the level, I'm gonna put this back in. I'm just gonna dump 6 quarts in this thing and then fire it up and run it. Let it run till the transmission gets up to temperature. There's an actual sticker on the bottom of the trans right here that tells you what temperature the transmission fluid should be when you're checking it. So what I'm gonna do is put the plug back in. I'm gonna pump 6 quarts of fluid in that fill port, fill the transmission up, put the truck on the ground, get it hot, warm up the fluid, and then pull this bolt out and set the level when the truck is sitting on the ground at ride height, weight on the tires. This is why I'm just gonna overfill this thing, because I don't want to come in here and have to add more fluid when this exhaust pipe is hot. I'd rather just overfill it and then drain out what I need to drain out of that drain bolt, or the level bolt, whatever you want to call it. So 6 quarts was not enough to actually fill this transmission. These cases come in cases of 6. So I ordered 1 case. Like I said, it was not enough to actually fill the transmission up to the recommended level. Now, with that said, I did drive the truck around with 6 quarts of fluid in the transmission as opposed to 7. I didn't see any issues. Typically, when you have a vehicle that is short on transmission fluid, when you pull it out of park and put it in drive or reverse or something like that, when you're actually changing gear, it'll have like a delayed response before it goes into gear if it's low on fluid. I didn't have any issues like that. I didn't have any issues driving it with 6 quarts in it as opposed to 7. But one thing I did want to go over real quick was the fact that when you're dropping the pan, changing the filter, cleaning out the pan, and refilling it, you're not getting the old fluid out of the torque converter. So that was why I drove the vehicle around for 300-400 miles, got more of that fluid exchanged out of the torque converter, and now I'm pulling about 4 more quarts out of the pan. I'm just sucking it all out of the pan, and then I'm going to dump actually 5 quarts in the pan and then set the level. Like I said, I was a quart short, so I'm sucking out 4, putting in 5. If you're just doing a pan drop, filter change, pick up 7 quarts. 6 is not going to be enough. All right, so once you know you have more than enough fluid in the transmission, the next thing we're going to do is set the level. It's a lot easier to drain off excess fluid than it is to add additional fluid to a hot transmission. So my recommendation, overfill it a little bit, because it's a heck of a lot easier to drain the overfilled amount than it is to add more when it's hot. So on the 6-speed trans, to set the level, what you're going to do is you're going to warm the transmission up so the fluid temperature is between 86 and 122 degrees. At that point, with the engine still running, you remove the level bolt out of the back of the pan. When you remove the level bolt, you're going to drain off the excess fluid into another pan. Once the fluid coming out of the transmission pan is just essentially dripping out of the level bolt, you put the level bolt back in. At that point, you're good to go. You're all done. The 8-speed is a very similar procedure, but they have a different temperature specification. So the 8-speed, exact same thing. Warm the transmission up. The temperature on the 8-speed is going to be between 131 and 149 degrees. At that point, with the engine still running, you're going to remove the level bolt on the driver's side front corner of the pan. Do the exact same thing. Drain out the excess fluid until the amount coming out of the level bolt hole is like a slow drip. At that point, put the plug back in it and you're good to go. So that's what I have for this video, guys. Hopefully you guys got something out of this. Like I said, out of the 3 fluids that I changed here, definitely the transmission was by far the most noticeable. It made a drastic change in the smoothness of how that transmission shifted. So overall, so far, I'm very, very happy with the Blue Label Mobil 1 fluid in the 6-speed behind the diesel. It definitely smoothed out the shifts 100%. So guys, I'll have links down in the description to the gear oil, to the transfer case fluid, to the Mobil 1 transmission fluid, as well as the different filters you need, whether you have the 6-speed or the 8-speed. As always, guys, if you guys like the video, hit like. If you want to see more content, go down and hit subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys.